Well, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for the small change in the starting time because it's not because of Victor, it's because of me that I have a plane and I have to rush a little. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce you Victor Lopez Madrona, who did the PhD in Alicante under the supervision of Santiago Canals, that many of you know. Victor was here at IFIS working 3 months with me in 2017 before he started the PhD, and he's really an expert in data analysis. He's now in France since already 5 years, working in the Institute for System Neuroscience, where Victor Hirsa is the director of the institute, that some of us also know him. And it's a pleasure to have him here. So Victor, I'm very happy that you could come and after some years, just to learn what you are doing there in Marseille. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudio. Well, it's actually the pleasure is mine to be here and to be back to the IFISC. So I spent a few months here like 10 years ago. And it's wonderful to see that the institute is even bigger than 10 years ago. But there are still some beautiful people here who are doing a great job. And it's amazing, the IFISC. So when Claudio proposed me to come here to give a seminar, I was thinking, okay, this is Institute for Physics. So I am doing some physics in my data analysis and with the brain, but I'm not the expert in physics. I mean, you are the experts. I do my work in neuroscience and data analysis. But I say, okay, I'm not going to enter in the details of the physics because you know more than me. Let's talk more about the brain and the work that I'm doing now, which is more about language and speech processing. I say, okay, this is my topic, is language. This is what I do, and I can show you something about language. But then also I realized that there are some people here doing language and physics on language. So you are amazing. You are doing everything. Never mind. I will try to give you some concepts about the speech processing in the brain, the different oscillators we have, and how can they interact with the different signals that we are listening in speech. So first of all, rather than that going directly to the details about oscillations, etc., I would like to introduce first my team there in Marseille. The data we have and this beautiful collaboration we have there in Marseille. And then I will go to the details. First, a very introduction about the neural tracking of the syllables and the phonemes, this about the speech, and then the last work that I want to present here today. So about my team. So our team actually is located in the hospital of La Timone in Marseille, and it is a collaboration between two institutes, the System Neuroscience Institute, that are doing the research, and the hospital itself. So it's a research unit there that we work a lot with epilepsy and epileptic patients. We are located there. And it's wonderful to be part of two teams at the same time, because also we have people that are clinicians, people that are researchers, we have engineers there, and we have two groups. That means that we have also 2 retreats per year. So we do 2 trips every year to different places to meet each other, you know, to know the other people working there. And so it's an epilepsy research center. That means that I need to talk to you a little bit about epilepsy before going to talk about the speech, because the data is coming from epileptic patients, indeed. So epilepsy is a severe condition that affects 1% of the population in the whole world. And in 1 in 3 cases, we cannot control the epileptic seizures using just pharmacology. So for these severe cases, we need to find alternatives to the pharmacology, try to cure them or to reduce the number of these seizures. So one of the things we do is a resective surgery. In this case, we have these severe conditions, and we need to open, basically, the head, find where is the epileptic areas, and remove them from the brain. In the worst case, we need to do that. It's the only way to cure them. But before doing the surgery, we do a lot of work. So the routine for a epileptic patient there in La Timone, first, they came after we know that they cannot be cured using just pharmacology. We do an MEG, magnetoencephalography. So the patient arrived, they do this magnetoencephalography, which is like an EEG, but more expensive. And then, using these signals that we are recording outside the brain, we can try to identify the activity that is epileptic. So it's activity coming from the brain, but have some morphology that is epileptic. And then we do the inverse problem. So if we know the the topography, which are the regions at the surface that are generating. We can try to reconstruct the activity inside the brain and localize, as we have here. Okay, so these are the areas that are causing or generating this epileptic activity. And we have the MEC, and also we are buying a new MEC system, which is this OPM MEC, this beautiful helmet, which is like crazy. Actually, this is the future for the MEC, in case you didn't know, because it's much cheaper than the current MEC. So it seems to be the future, and in the future, we will have all these crazy helmets. And it's crazy because we can also put electrodes in the mouth. So if you have an electrode in the mouth, you should be able to record activities from the brain, but that are closer to the mouth rather than to the surface of the head. Okay, once we have more or less some information that we can obtain non-invasively with this MEC, sometimes it's not enough to have a specific location. Okay, the epilepsy is in this voxel of the brain. Let's operate them. So before doing that, we do a second analysis. In this case, is the SEEG or stereotactic EEG. So to have a better definition of where is the epileptic zone, what we do is to implant electrodes directly in the brain of these patients. So based on the clinicians, they will say, okay, I think maybe this region, this second region, or maybe a third one, we are not sure. So we implant directly electrodes on those locations. So this is one patient. We can see here the different electrodes implanted in this brain. And for each electrode, we may have between 10 and 15 contacts within the electrode. So at the end, we may have like 200 or 300 recording sites all along the brain. Of course, all the time is to cure the patient, to better define where the epileptic zone and do a better surgery. And we do exactly the same, but now we have much better accurate locations. And we also, as the engineers and researchers there, we're trying to improve the methodology, trying to create new methods to have a better definition of where is the epileptic zone. Because sometimes you don't have a specific epileptic pattern, but it's more a network analysis what we are doing. So if one region is very highly connected with the others, we can either remove that node or cut the connections. There are different options. And with this analysis, we can try to better identify the epileptic network. And this is mainly for the clinical research. Also, we have something quite new, is the possibility to record simultaneously both. So the intercerebral activity and the non-invasive MEG activity. And this is quite complicated to have in one system, because with the MEG, we have the problem that we cannot record electric activity. I mean, every electric device that you have there is going to introduce some noise, but we can kind of avoid that and record both at the same time. And this is the only way to prove that the activity that we are recording at the surface is truly coming from specific areas in the brain. Because you are in the surface, okay, you have a beautiful model, inverse problem, and say, yeah, it's this voxel A34, but you cannot prove it. You can do a model to prove it, but if you can, or if you already have an electrode there, then you can do a correlation and see whether your method is working or not. So we can have activity coming from the MEC and at the same time, activity coming from the intracerebral recordings, and then compute the correlation between them. And one of our last work was to prove that even structures as the hippocampus, which is quite deep in the brain, so far away from the surface, can be also recording using the proper methodology with non-invasive MEG recordings. And the future of this method is to avoid, at the end, the need to implant all these electrodes in the patient. If we have all the information from the head, from the surface, much better. Yes? For the brain damage, not for the brain. I mean, because they are quite thin, so at least they don't have any secondary effect after implanting this electrode. There is no brain damage, but there are some other effects because of the surgery. What I mean, that you need to do some holes, you can have infections there, and there are some problems, but it's not the electrode that is causing some brain damage at that point. Or not something severe that we can actually measure, or that we can see an effect on the behavior of the patients. And during all this time, so the patient will, once they have all the electrodes implanted in the brain, they spend 2 weeks at the hospital, because we need to record all the data. We need to wait for the patient to have seizures, to have these epileptic seizures to record activity and better identify. And for 2 weeks, the patient is there just waiting and to record activity. And we can take this opportunity to do some fundamental research. We can do tasks about memory, about language, about other processes, trying to understand, because we have this condition already in the patient, but we can try to do some fundamental research, see how memory works in the brain, how speech works in the brain, as we have the only way to obtain data from the brain. I mean, from intracerebral recordings is through epileptic patients. So this is the data that we have, that we are using to answer all the different questions that we have in our institute. So this is the data we have, the participants. These are our patients. And now I will introduce the work or the topic of my unit, which is about speech and how our brain, especially the auditory cortex, analyzes or understand this speech signal, different from other noise, music, etc. So speech, just the speech without entering the brain, is a rich acoustic signal. So it contains a lot of relevant information at multiple, but also specific time scales. So if we have this is the acoustic waveform of someone speaking, we have the speech envelope of this acoustic signal. And if we do the power spectrum of this acoustic signal, we can identify a peak between 4 and 8, around 5 hertz. There is a peak in this envelope of the speech. And it doesn't matter the language. So it can be Spanish, Italian, French, Catalan, doesn't matter. You will find always a peak around 5 hertz. And this rim of 5 hertz, it's the same, it's basically the syllabic rate, because every time we speak, we use syllables, and this syllabic rate is what is creating this oscillation in the speech acoustic signal at 5 hertz. But we also have more time scale. We have the syllables, but we have a lower frequency, we have words, we have also sentences, and at higher frequencies, we can have the phonemes, which is around 12 hertz, even higher, and the poetic features. Or also we have the fundamental frequency of the voice, which is 100, or it can be 200, 300, depends of the speaker. So I can speak like that, or I can speak like that. I will tune not the syllables, not the phonemes, but the fundamental frequency of my voice. So we have a lot of time scales in there and different frequencies involved. So like 25 years ago, Sabri and Perrot did an experiment to see which of all these frequencies and time scale, which are important for the speech, to understand the speech. Because if I speak like that, oh, I speak like that, for you, it's the same. Oh, it's different, but you understand my speech. So which are the key frequencies that we need to know? So for this experiment, they took the original signal here, a speech signal. Yep. And they did a time window. And for each window, they just reversed the signal there. So if you see, for this specific time window, we have the signal B, which is the same as here, but reverse. Here is the same as here, but reverse. And then they concatenated A and B. So at the end, what you have is a signal which is the same as the original one, but reversing at slightly at different time windows. And then they reproduced these sounds, these speech sentences, to some participants to see whether they recognize or not what they were saying. And they change, then they modulate the duration of this time window. And what they found is that if the time window is very small, like a few milliseconds, so you remove just at every 5 milliseconds, you just reverse the signal, what you have at the end is pretty much the same as the original one. And in terms of intelligibility, it doesn't affect. So you can understand perfectly the sentence, so what you are doing. But if this duration is higher and higher, this time window is every time higher and higher and higher until you have like even several seconds, is when you reverse entirely the whole speech. You don't understand anything. So there are 2 knee points in this curve. So we can see that when we are talking about 30 milliseconds, so before 30 milliseconds, I mean, it's like shorter than 30 milliseconds, we can understand speech perfectly. And then we are losing intelligibility until we have around 200 milliseconds, then it's impossible. If we are in the middle, around 100, you understand something. It's not perfect, but you can catch some things. But if it's longer than 200 milliseconds, forget about it. You don't understand anything. And these 2 knee points, which are around 30 milliseconds at 200 milliseconds, In terms of frequency, we are talking about 30 Hz and 5 Hz. It makes sense that here, what we are doing is reversing the syllables. It's at the time scale of the syllables. So if we are shorter and syllables, we can catch things. So we have the phonemes altered, but we can get the content. But if we are reversing syllables or even words, forget about it. These are, again, two of the frequencies that are important here. So this was only about the speech, the acoustic signal there. Then if we move to the brain, basically what we have is all the auditory system, and what we are, the speech signal that we have, this acoustic signal, the pressure signal, is entering basically in the ear, the middle ear, inner ear, until reaching the cochlea, here in the middle, where we will transform this acoustic signal, these differences of pressure, into an electric activity. And this electric activity will reach the primary auditory cortex, the first area, one of the first areas in the brain, that will recognize and process the different sounds that we are listening. So basically, what we have in the primary auditory cortex is kind of a mirror of the activity that we are listening, this pressure signal, but in terms of electric and brain activity. But in terms of content, the information that we have here should be the same information as we have here, because this is the first area of processing. We need to have everything. And one of the trying to see how much this activity that we have in the brain correlates or it's similar to the activity that we are speaking, this speech acoustic signal. They did an experiment basically computing the correlation. This is EEG, if I remember well, so the surface electrodes, and they record whether this activity was similar to the speech signal, the envelope actually of the speech signal. And they found that they did kind of the coherence across frequency, and only at theta band, this theta is around 5 Hz, the activity of the brain is similar as the activity of the speech. And if we look at the topography that we have here, so which are the electrodes that can capture this activity, this is the topography that we have, so activity here, 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 and there, which is activity close to the auditory cortex, obviously. So it's interesting that they found only the theta activity, but the speech signal, as we have said, is quite rich. We have the phonemes, we have words, we have sentences, we have higher frequencies, but using only the surface electrodes only, we can record as a similarity at this theta 5 Hz band. And the result was like, the conclusion is like the brain is actually tracking the speech by tracking the different syllables. It's one of the main features of the speech that we track. But we know that there are more frequencies, so trying to investigate and know more about which are the main frequencies that are important for our brain. They did a second experiment, basically not using speech, but using just sound that was modulated at different frequencies, like this one. So there's a modulation in this sound, and they apply different sounds using different frequency bands, like 5 Hz, 10 Hz, 15, 20, 30, or 40 Hz. And then they check whether the auditory cortex was really tracking or not this activity. And again, they found this beautiful topography of the auditory cortex, which is there, located. And what they found, this is a kind of the coherence, and the different colors are the different sounds. They saw that when you have a theta, so a sound that is modulated at the same frequency at the syllabic rate, the brain detects quite well this sound. When we have sounds modulated in the middle, around 10, 15, 20 Hz, so these are sounds. I mean, the auditory cortex is processing not only speech, but every sound that we have around. So, but however, the response is much lower when we are listening to something modulated at 10 Hz. And when we have something modulated at 30, 40, then we have again an increase. So the brain has two frequencies that are preferred for the brain. One is 5 Hz related to this syllabic rate, and the other is not so clear which one it is, this 30, 40 Hz, but it correlates also with some phonemes and phonetic features that we have. So, and these are just sounds modulated. We don't have a speech here, but we prefer some specific oscillations rather than others. And as we have these two time scales, so we have the theta and the gamma, this has been related, these two oscillations, with the theta-gamma neural code or cross-frequency coupling code. That both, at the end, if you have a syllable, you have phonemes within the syllables. So it's very integrated in the same cycle, let's say. So it has been suggested that there are some computational models saying that we have the syllabic time scale, which is this 5 Earth rim, and within the syllabic time scale, we have the different phonemes that are coupled at the same cycle. And it's supposed that the brain is going to structure the activity hierarchically. So for each cycle, we have one syllable, and within each syllable, we have embedded the different phonemes and the different frequencies, like a pyramid. And they have been described some models when we have the speech signal, like enter it, modulating some gamma activity, also some theta activity, this 5 and 30 Hz. And it can be suggested that it's also this, as we can detect the syllabic tracking from outside the brain, it can be suggested that this is the main riff that we have, syllable, syllable, syllable. And we use this main riff then to put all the other information, like the different syllables, to organize them in the brain. Now that even if we are in the brain, it's not just something passive that we are listening. We need to understand what is a syllable. We need to understand the words. So we need to process all this information. And it can be said that this theta neural code is a way to structure this information and to extract or process the speech content from there. And this is kind of the scheme of this theta-gamma coupling and how to measure it. Basically, we have a slower rim, and at the specific phases, we have an increase of the gamma activity, but for other phases, we don't have any activity. So they are phase-locked, these two rims. It's quite beautiful, and it has been proposed, and people like this theta-gamma neural code because we can find everywhere in the brain, in so many places, not only for speech. It has been suggested that in many areas, like the prefrontal cortex here, while doing some different tasks, we can see also this coupling. Here we have 5 Hz coupled with 125 Hz. It has been described also for memory processes, so in the hippocampus. So here you don't have a input at this theta, phonemes, whatever. But we have like theta rims, and we have different cycles that are faster, this gamma, and seems to encode different elements of for memory. Or it can be used also, this is the work we proposed also with Claudia a few years ago, that we can use this theta-gamma neural code to synchronize different units in the brain. So we can use this slower rim, this theta, to have all the brain following the same rhythmicity, so it's easy to communicate because you are in synchrony. And then this fast gamma activity should be independent and should reflect like local processes of each structure. So more about the theta gamma dynamics. Yes. So they measure it in the brain. Here it is, the result of the acoustic signal using MEG. And they found here, using surface EEG, that we can also modulate the speech rate, like speaking at one rate, or speaking a little bit faster, so we can speak or a little bit lower, so we can modulate the syllabic rate. We say that it's around 5 Hz, but we can modulate it like faster or slower. And by doing that, we can also see that here, the frequency for the phase will change from 5, 6, 7. I mean, we can see here much better. And also we can tune also the different frequencies of the high gamma, these phonemes. Basically, again, the brain is kind of tracking this speech sign. It was a kind of long introduction, but now I will introduce. This is some of this work. It was also done by my institute, but what I'm doing now is to compare in the auditory cortex using this epileptic patient that we have. So we have the activity measured directly on the primary auditory cortex with this electrode to see how much this activity is similar to the activity we record with the acoustic signal, basically. So we do some data analysis first, which is independent component analysis, because these are kind of the activity we record, but rather to analyzing raw data, we extract independent components from this data that correspond to independent neural sources in the brain. So one example is that we have this kind of signal. You can see here that at the top, we have some activity that only belongs to this, is only recorded by these two contacts. So when doing ICA, we can see that the topography, spatial profile, or whatever, we'll say, okay, these two contacts are contributing or are recording this activity as activity, but not the others. So probably what we have here is that the neural source is located quite close to these two contacts. So only these two contacts will record this activity, or will record with a higher amplitude compared to the others. In this example, we can see that there are some patterns that are in these 4 or 5 contacts. So the topography will be like that. And probably in this case, these are reflecting or recording a source which is not as close as the first one, but is a little bit farther. So when talking, it will reach these 4 or 5 contacts with more or less the same intensity. So it's a matter of electromagnetic fields and how they propagate in the brain. There are some other signals that appear all along the electrode. So it's exactly the same signal. This kind of the topography, probably these are reflecting remote source. So something that is quite far away from the electrode. So the electromagnetic field will spread and reach all the contacts with more or less the same intensity. So actually it's something coming from very, very far away. Very, very far away is 2 centimeters. But in the case of the brain, it's far away. And we know that because when we are recording EEG or MEG, at the end, we are not recording local activity. We're recording activity that is generated far away. And through this propagation, volume conduction will reach these contacts. And the funny thing of independent component is that once we have this topography, we can extract 3 time courses. And each time course will correspond to each of these 3 generators, the blue, the green, and the purple one. And we can analyze the information here rather than that information that we have in raw recordings that is a mixture of local and remote activity. So these are the recordings that we have, and in our task was quite simple. We want an ecological system rather than a specific task with a specific pattern. So we have a story, 10 minutes of a story, and the patients are there just listening to this story for 10 minutes. So we have the audio signal, and we have the brain data recorded directly from the primary and secondary auditory cortices. And we do this is the recordings. When we do ICA, we can have 2, 3 components that are basically reflecting most of the variance in our data. And once we have these independent components, we want to see whether this brain activity is coupled or not with activity in the speech signal, specifically the speech envelope. So to do so, what we've done is a granular causality analysis to measure the directionality, kind of the directionality between both signals, whether they are coherent or not, but also who is driving the other, which is, of course, from the speech to the brain. So the brain follows the dynamics of the speech. And when we measure that, we can see that there are different components. So there is not one single frequency that is captured by the brain, but we have some neural sources. You can see here responding only to theta, or to this syllabic rate. And there are some neural sources that are responding to 2 different frequencies. One is 40 Hz, and the other is 100 Hz. So that means that there are at least 3 frequencies important in the speech envelope, theta, low gamma, and high gamma, and our brain is detecting them using different neural sources. And if we try to compute the granular causality in the opposite direction, there is nothing. That means that so far, at least the primary of the cortex cannot anticipate the speech signal yet. Maybe in other brain areas we can have that effect. So we've seen that there are 3 main frequencies, theta, low gamma, high gamma, 5 Hz, 30, and 100 Hz. We can study the cross-frequency coupling between these 3 signals. So when we do that, we can see that in the brain, we have a beautiful theta-gamma coupling, the theta-gamma neural code. We can see memory, whatever. We have the phases around 4 or 5 Hz that are coupled with the amplitude modulation around 40 Hz and 120 Hz, these 3 frequencies that we were talking before. So at each phase, or at each specific phases of the theta cycle, which is each syllable, we have these phonemes and this fundamental frequency of the voice that is embedded there. However, if we look the same in the speech signal, the result is exactly the same. So if we analyze the theta-gamma neural code of an acoustic signal, we have exactly the same result. So basically the question is the brain doing anything? Or is just a mirror exactly the same as we have in the acoustic signal? Is there any theta-gamma neural code? Or basically if you have the same one specific pattern that is coupled, you have also something that is coupled. So one thing that we found is that first is that these theta and gamma neural sources are distributed in the brain. So there are some, it's not quite clear. I mean, if you don't know the anatomy, then it's completely a mess. But there are some areas that are in charge of detecting the syllabic rate, and some areas that are in charge of detecting the phonemes and the fundamental frequency of the voice. So even if you have something that is kind of passive, an acoustic signal, the brain knows that, okay, I have phonemes, I have syllables, so I will put some neurons working on this activity and some neurons working on the other activity. We can split that activity in the brain. And then we can study also the directionality that we have here between theta and gamma neural sources. And this is the cross-frequency directionality. First, as we know that if we have some cross-frequency coupling in the acoustics, maybe we have also something in the brain. So first we study whether there is some directionality in the speech signal and between gamma and theta of the speech acoustics. There is no directionality because both are two elements of the same thing. They are completely simultaneous. It's not the phoneme is creating or driving the syllables. No, you have a syllable because you have at the same time these phonemes. But when we study the directionality in the brain, we can find a clear negative directionality suggesting that are the gamma neurons which are driving the theta neurons in the brain. It's something that we can find in the brain, but it's not present already in the speech. So this theta-gamma neural code has some importance in the brain. So based on the original model that they have, what we can propose so far is that actually the speech signal, rather than being modulating both theta and gamma neurons, what they are doing is driving mainly the gamma activity, and from the fundamental frequency and the phonemes, then this will modulate and set the phase of the theta rings to better track the syllabic rate and then probably organize the information around this theta ring. And if I have some time, I think I do, yeah. Also, a second work in the same direction is about encoding silence. I've talked about mainly two frequencies, or three, like theta 5 Hz, 30, 100 Hz, but now I will talk about lower frequencies, the delta activity. The delta band is around 0.5 or even 0 Hz, between 0 and 2 Hz. So something quite slow compared. And this slow ring is related to the integration of linguistic units into a coherent structure. Why do I mean that? Because if I say a syllable, there is no language there. I mean, there is some information, but if you are talking about speech and about whole language, we need sentences to have a coherent speech. If you have one syllable, you wait 1 minute, and another syllable, you cannot communicate using something like that. You need to process not only one word, but several words to process several sentences. And these delta rims, these slower rims, have been suggested a way to integrate all the different syllables that you have to create a story in your head. Okay, and these delta rings have been detected in the brain, and it has been related to many properties of the speech. One of the things, the main one, is the pauses in the speech. So it's a good way to integrate information. So I'm talking, every time I pause, I give you some time for the brain to process the information, and another sentence, wait, another sentence, wait, another sentence. So it's related to the pauses. We know that if we do some correlation, we can find that. Also, it's quite important for conversation, the pauses, because your brain is waiting for the other people to stop if you want to say something, or either you can talk at the same time, but if we are in a formal situation, you wait, so you are expecting pauses in the speech. But it's kind of when we are reading, so we expect that we have one sentence, pause, sentence, pause, sentence, pause. Okay, in a book it works, but in the general way of speaking and talking with each other, the pauses are not as important. But it's much more important the prosody, the intonation of the speech. And this intonation of the speech is also modulated at delta frequencies. And just modulating the intonation and the voice, we can send different messages, because at the end, speech is communication. But we want this to communicate, not just to integrate syntax and some small units. Because, for example, I can be sure that intonation is important. I can be sure that intonation is important. So it's the same sentence in a book, but I'm sending two different messages. And the third one also is related to prediction. This delta ring has been related to based on whether we are expecting or not something from the speech. For example, if I you are expecting something from me there. So in that moment, you are expecting something, so you have the delta activity saying, okay, wait for the next thing, because it's important, or maybe not, but it's also related to the expectation that we have, because in the speech, we're all the time trying to predict, trying to understand or know more about the next sentence or the next word that we are going to listen. So these are kind of the main ideas of the delta activity and how the delta activity is related to the speech. So we are also studying that activity, and to do that, we have the same data, the same 10-minute story, and we do a TRF analysis, temporal response function, and there we have the brain signal, which is Y, and we try to create a model using a convolutional model between the speech envelope and some impulse response. So in this model, we try to find the best impulse response to do a fit between the speech envelope and the brain signal. And once we have that, we can see whether this is the correlation coefficient between our real brain signal and the response that we can have combining the speech envelope with this impulse response. So we can see in this example, these are different components. We have some, for example, high gamma activity that can be pretty well predicted with this model, which corresponds to this high frequency activity, the fundamental frequency of the voice. But for this work, we'll focus only on the independent components that have delta activity between 1 and 2 Hz. And this information is also present in the speech envelope. So before I presented this electrode, which is Hell's gyrus targeting the primary auditory cortex, but this delta activity is like at the integration of units. We are in higher processes. This is not primary auditory cortex, because primary auditory cortex is quite, let's say, passive, just recording information coming and doing some easy processes. But if we are integrating information, we're talking about prosody, we're talking about expectation, this is in higher units, and we are exploring, at least we can find more of this delta activity in the associative auditory cortex or the superior temporal gyrus. So it's, in terms of anatomy, it's a higher level. And this is one of the recordings we have. And when we talk about delta activity, basically what we have is responses. Blip, another response, another response. If you do a Fourier transform, this seems to be a delta, or you have activity, a peak in the delta band, but it's not an oscillation in delta. So you have events that have duration around 1 second. So what we've done to identify and characterize these different units is a convolutional learning method. So we can find which one is the best kernel that replicates this activity, and we can find the activation pattern of this kernel around all the structure. So the idea is that we don't know the kernel, we don't know the activation time, but we have a lot of data. So we can try to find whether there is a kernel or not that is repeated in the time, and then find which is the activation time of this kernel. Or maybe we have one or several kernels, several activations. So if we select the time period after each event, here, basically, on this event, and we do the average of all this information, what we have is basically the kernel itself, because we are averaging, we are removing noise, and we have the average of the response. And if we look at the time frequency map, what we can see that more than delta activity, what we have is an increase of the beta activity, a new frequency now, 20 Hz. These are not phonemes, these are not syllables, this is not related to speech. Actually, this 20 Hz, it doesn't correlate with the speech signal. And we have also a decrease in the gamma activity around 60 and 80 Hz. And if we have these effects. If we look at the same in the speech signal, so the acoustic signal, when we can see that every time we have one of these events, we have a decrease. There is no speech signal there are no acoustics. This is basically representing that what we are encoding, or these events are encoding pauses, silences. So every time we are talking an I pause, then your brain is generating one of these responses. Okay, this is what we have in the associative cortex. But if we look at the same time events in the primary auditory cortex, what we know, we don't have delta activity, but we have the timing in higher areas. So let's see what was going on in the first step the premature cortex. So there are not delta events. This is completely flat, of course. However, we can still have this decrease of gamma and this increase of the beta activity. We can explain easily the decrease of high gamma activity because it's a pause. We don't have signal. So we have a theoretical decrease of activity because there is no activity. But we do have an increase of beta activity. And something that is curious, the first is that we have a transformation of the gamma activity, because here it was easy, 120 Hz corresponds to the fundamental frequency. But this 80 Hz, this is not in the speech signal. So this is actually the first element of speech processing that we can find, because the information here is kind of the same as the information that we have here if we do metrics of information theory. However, we're already transforming all this acoustic signal into something that the brain is already interpreting at a different frequency range. And this increase of beta activity, also, if we do measures of granular causality that I'm not presenting here because if not, it's too much, we have actually a top-down effect. Basically, we mean that the areas that are higher hierarchically, so the associative cortex, is sending information to the first area, the premature cortex, at the beta band to what is the question that we want to address. So what is the information sending there? But it's actually a top-down process to control which is the speech signal that we want to interpret now. So for example, for the expectations that we have in the speech is already in this beta band that we are sending this top-down information. And this is one of the frequency bands that they are exploring, for example, in the predictive coding framework, rather than gamma or theta that are acoustics primarily, but all the top-down and bottom-up processes are in this beta band. So this was all. So the take-home messages of this presentation basically is that we had a auditory cortex that is tracking the speech signal, the premature cortex. However, we have two different neural sources, one related to the syllables and the other related to phonemes and also the fundamental frequency of the voice. They are different, and also we have a clear directionality that the brain is first processing gamma activity, that means phonemes and fundamental frequency, and then is processing the syllables. We have done that when we have these poses of the speech, there are also some delta beta events that appear at this specific period. It's a way to integrate the speech content of the activity that we had before. And also it's a window of opportunity to have top-down processes to anticipate, predict, or send information to the main area about what do you want or what are you expecting to hear in the next sentence. So that was all. Thank you for, of course, to Claudia and all the FISC and all the team that I have in Dynamap, DCAP, Latimon. Also, I have a collaborator in the University of Cambridge, Jeremy. And that was all. Thank you very much. And if you have any question, thank you.
Thank you, Victor, very much. Questions? Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the very nice talk. I'm not an expert, nor do I know anything of this at any reasonable level, but I just have two general questions. Okay, first one, when you're talking about causality, you were using a lot the Granger causality, but you know, Granger causality normally cannot reject the hypothesis that there is a third element that is driving the two things, which can have a different lag. So how are you, because I know also Claudia with Jaime has worked on these things of having a third population intermediate, you know, and synchronizing. So, you know, how do you treat this?
Yeah, for the Granger causality was mostly done for a speech brain. So we don't know what is, I mean, if there is a third thing, we don't know what do happen between the speech and the brain, driving both the speech and the brain. So, I mean, it was just a test to see which are the frequencies that are important in the brain, because the directionalities are something that we know. I mean, with causality, we know that the brain, I mean, the speech is driving the brain activity. I don't know what can be this third population driving both with different delays. But sure, for the theta-gamma coupling, that was rather than, well, it was a different metric, but it's the same problem. So we don't know whether there is a third population driving both. If there is something driving both, let's say with different delays, it's something that it's not how to say, related to the speech signal, or at least not in a linear manner. So I don't know how to interpret also that. We can have also interneural things that are driving both. But of course, it's not driven by the language, by the speech, because we cannot identify this third element that we have there. And even if, okay, for the directionality, we can find, or you can suggest that there are a third element, we can have some limitations, but something that is important is that we have two units in the brain, two neural sources, one theta, the other gamma. So, okay, we have a gamma, maybe there is some delay between both because of a third element, but the brain is already splitting this information into two different speech content, syllables and phonemes. That's one of the main messages there.
Okay. And my second question was about, it's a bit outside this, but I think it's maybe related. So I have been wondering, for example, I'm very interested in music. And for example, here you say, okay, when we do the experiments with the speech, we see that, you know, the rhythm of the speech, of the syllables, of the phonemes and stuff, that there must be some relationship with the scales of the brain. But for example, with music, it happens that always the fifth of a note, it's not that a particular frequency of a note you like more than others, but when you pair two notes in a relationship of frequencies, then you do like it. So it's not the actual frequency of the note itself, it's just in a chord, when there's some relationships between frequencies, we like that. We say that's a nice chord. Do you know anything about this? Any studies, papers about which you may also link to your knowledge about frequencies and scales of the brain?
So I know some people working on music and doing things that are similar. Also, there are some people in our team doing similar work, but in music and predictive coding, whether we can predict or not music. And what they found is that indeed there are some frequencies of some notes that we prefer compared to others, but it's also because we know a lot of music. We know a lot of music because music every day, basically. So they did a similar experiment, or a different one, putting some music and introducing weird notes. Let's say that something that breaks the naturality of music. So the music was completely new. It's not a song you know and then you break it, and of course this created an expectation, but it's something that is kind of breaking the normal music based on our standard Occidental music, Western music, Eastern music, sorry. And what they found is that if they compare musicians, expert in music, with non-musicians, even if both can catch this different, for the musician that they know much more about music, this catch was much stronger than that. So I think what you found may be related to the accommodation that we are already habituated to some music. So we have some expectations in the brain, even if you don't think about those expectations. It's like you're not conscious about that, but your brain is doing that. It's expecting the next note, that is expecting a specific pattern in music, but you can modulate that. It's like if you study music, you will have a better response compared if you've been in a cave for your life.
Hello. So fascinating. Thank you very much for the talk.
Thank you.
About this fundamental frequency of the voice that you mentioned. I mean, there are some languages which have they're called tonal, right? Because the tone is meaningful. It's in Chinese. I don't know this. Did you study this or?
So I'm not studying it, but I think I have actually a. So the intonation is important for the message. The fundamental frequency is not so related with this intonation. This is more about the prosody, let's say. Because for the fundamental frequency, it's not so important to understand a speech. For example, if we whisper, we completely kill this high frequency signal. I can't expect that. Syllables. But we don't have a fundamental frequency for that voice, but we can understand the brain. About what you were saying, there are some people studying actually the effect of prosody and the effect of the information that we have. So rather than studying the number of syllables that we have, is the number of bits of information that you have at a specific time rate. And they found that they have quite similar frequency rates compared to the, let's say, syllables. Or in terms of temporal information, it follows exactly the same time scale. And then that if you have more information, because your intonation is quite important in your language, then you have less syllables per second or per minute. So at the end, in average, you are sending the same information per minute. This is the concept that they are studying in terms of information flow. And yeah, that's one. If not, then we move to prosody, but it's not the same as the intonation of each syllable, but rather than the intonation of the whole sentence.
Thank you.
There are many fascinating things, many questions that we can ask, but one is about evolutionary processes, or how we got to this. It seems that many languages have this 5 hertz syllabic frequency. Do you think is this something related to the size of the mouth of the humans? Can this be tested by some other animals, or is there something in the brain producing the theta rhythm that has driven the evolution of our voice processing apparatus? I don't know who was first, or is there any idea or why this frequency is important?
So a lot of people think that these 5 hertz or these low frequencies are important because you can see it's quite close to the alpha frequency that is kind of all around the brain, the thin 10 Hz rhythm. That is in, okay, we are close to this thin Hz, so it's a way to synchronize all the brain, to have all the different processes, because also we talk about some other processes like walking, moving, etc. You can find some patterns at similar frequencies. So it has been suggested as the general for the humankind frequency that our brain loves 5, 10 Hz. These are frequencies that our brain loves. This is a theory that said about that. But if we test our vocal system, it's quite complicated to vocalize higher than 10 Hz. So I can speak faster, but there is a moment that I cannot really articulate any word. So these are some physical impediments. So I don't know which one went first. For different animals, it can be said that the frequencies are not so different. So I mean, our articulatory system is not completely different from other species. So it seems to be something really in the nature. So I would say that it's first the system, and also it matches that we have some frequencies that are general for other motor tasks. And yeah, I will say all that. And something interesting about these frequencies, because I say 5 hertz, but we said if we modulate, if I speak faster or slower, we can still track this activity. So there are some many studies following which are the bandwidth or the range of the frequency we can understand. And actually, we can multiply by 3 max and divide by 3. That means that if we talk about 5 hertz, we can reach 12, 15 hertz, and we still understand the speech. I mean, we still have 15. It's really limit, but still that's the limit. If we talk faster than that, because we can create acoustic signal faster than that, is our brain doesn't understand anything. Even if we have perfect articulatory synthesis created artificially, our brain cannot follow that frequencies. And the same for the lower frequencies. And you have a decrease also of the activation, I mean, in our brain. So which one was first? I answered you. I will say first was the articulatory system, because also we have some in common with other species, but I mean, need to time travel to understand that maybe.
Yeah, very interesting. Thanks. And so following on what Emilio asked, so is there any change, I mean, within the same species, so humans? I don't know if there's any data, you know, any change in this kind of internal clock related maybe to language in, for instance, childs before, you know, that they really learn languages, or after? And, you know, just I'm wondering, yeah, same, more or less on the same line of the previous questions, if, you know, when you understand and you learn a language, if also your thinking is related to an internal speech with more or less the same clock.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank
So this theta and gamma, when have been studied in child, like 3, 4 years old, and we still have these preferences for low frequencies rather than higher frequencies. So it's not completely empty, let's say a baby, and then we artificially generate or create this preference for these 2 frequencies. It's much lower. But what we have in childs is mainly an effect of attention there. Because for a baby, speech is nothing, it's noise. So you don't have attention, then it's more difficult to track, because all this activity that I saw in you in the prefrontal cortex is highly modulated by attention, because you are listening to speech, you are expecting speech, so you can easily track. For a baby, don't care. So you have a lot of inhibition coming from other frequencies that really kills, which are the frequencies there. And actually you can study that this speech tracking in kids like 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, you have an increase of this neural tracking of the speech, followed by a decrease in the inhibition, like also an increase in attention, but it's highly correlated, both effects during development.
Okay, well, if not, there are no more questions. Thanks again, Victor.
Thank